Libraries and other collecting institutions hold a wealth of resources in their collections. These resources present a range of varying perspectives and attitudes captured at different periods of time throughout history. When looked at through a modern lens, we can see that many of these viewpoints are outdated and don't align with our current way of thinking, particularly those depicting marginalised and underrepresented people and communities. What if I was to say this is the exact same thing with our metadata description? Our descriptive practices, the cataloguing rules, standards, subject thesaurus and classification systems that we use originate from a Western perspective and represent a largely white male or patriarchal Christian view of the world and of organising information. In addition to this, metadata can reflect the viewpoint and perspective of the person who created it. Cataloguing an item requires a metadata practitioner to review and describe the material with the end goal of enabling its discovery and use. We may like to think of this as an objective task. However, a lot of what we do is interpretive, and the perspective of the cataloguer, including any bias, can be embedded in the metadata we create. In this way, with or without intention, our metadata practices and metadata records can exclude, silence, harm, or mischaracterise marginalised people. Reparative description aims to address this. It goes beyond simply using neutral and non-offensive language, but aims to change metadata practice to ensure descriptions are culturally appropriate, community-centred, and respectful and inclusive of all people, as well as being accurate. We can't change the content of the resources we are describing. In fact, it's an important part of truth-telling that we don't hide from our problematic past. We all share responsibility for equity and diversity, and we can do our part by ensuring our metadata descriptions do not perpetuate outdated viewpoints or cause harm by using offensive terminology or by omission, such as not acknowledging Australian Indigenous cultural knowledge contained in a work. When first starting any reparative description initiative, it can appear to be quite a daunting and massive task, but there is help at hand. The guidelines for First Nations collection description were released in late 2023 to support people describing collections and cataloguing resources containing information about or resources written by First Nations people. Written by Tui Raven, this was an initiative supported by ALIA, NASLA, CALL, Kaval and AATSIS, who all recognise the need for such guidance. Navigating the guidelines on your own or within your institution can still raise questions and challenges. More direct support from your colleagues is available. Accord, which is ALIA's special interest group for record description, have formed a reparative description community of practice. This group is open to all metadata practitioners, no matter what type of institution you work in or where you are in your reparative metadata journey. It provides a safe space to ask questions, to hear from colleagues and peers about what they're doing and their approach, to share ideas and projects, as well as the opportunity to hear from guest speakers. If you're interested in joining this group, check out the Accord website.
So for us, when we're thinking about reparative description, there's obviously a focus on things like updating inappropriate Dewey numbers, looking at terminology, subject headings that might be out of date or offensive, looking at content that might be sensitive for any number of reasons. But we've also very much moved beyond that to a place where reparative description for us is about elevating the voices of people in our collection that might not be elevated in a standard catalogue record. So if you think about the fields that you usually see, you know, you've got the title, you've got the author, who's not included in there, that could be included in there. So specifically, if you're looking at community publications, you know, conference papers, for example, these places where there can be, you know, 15 or 20 people that have contributed to a book that just don't get a mention in the work. So at this point for us, it's about dramatically increasing the amount of information that's available from scholars and researchers from communities that haven't been represented well in the past. So yeah, there's a look backwards towards what's been harmful in the past, but we are now at the stage where we need to be raising up and celebrating the voices that we do have in our collections that just don't show up in a standard catalogue record.
So it's fairly recent for us, and we were driven by internal priorities and the work of our Indigenous strategy team and our First Nations reference group here in the department. We form partnerships across our organisation to identify and address organisational needs and to design innovative ways for the library to support their goals. And to do this effectively, we reassessed the systems and frameworks that we were previously using in the library to describe and categorise Indigenous and First Nations materials in our collection. Our first task, we decided one of our first tasks was that we would review and update our subject authorities in the library catalogue, just as a starting point. So a key resource for this was Tui Raven's guidelines for First Nations collection description, and we also scanned best practices in the Australian and wider colonial library landscape. So we ran a literature search across that. As part of the project, we're not only acquiring new materials, but we're uncovering unique items in our collection. So those are departmental publications as well as artefacts. And our goal is to make them accessible through improved metadata and multiple access points, including a centralised intranet space. And additionally, we've added information to the library catalogue to alert our users to potentially sensitive items, and that includes an option for users to engage with the library team on appropriate access to culturally sensitive material. And throughout this process, we've maintained engagement with our library clients. So that's one-on-one communication to presenting on our First Nations resources and services across the wider organisation.
Our primary team of 3 staff from collection services and a client services project officer in Bathurst, and we also have a number of staff on other campuses who have been helping us out. So we just kind of get into contact with them and let them know what needs to be done, and they're usually happy to oblige. And we wanted to make it clear that our libraries are safe spaces for everyone. So we started with statements containing cultural warnings on our library homepage. We also added an acknowledgement of where we received our subject headings from, which of course is ALIAVic. Something else that we did was we added ALIAVic subject headings labels in the label in Primo, so that we've got both the Library of Congress subject headings but above that we've got our ALIAVic headings, and we've added maybe 2 or 3 to each item in the catalogue, 2 or 3 of the main ones for each item, and we've just scrolling down. We've added some Auslan language codes as well. So we've gone through our items, print and electronic, and if it's got a lot of a particular First Nations language, we'll add that into the 041 field. And something else that we did that we thought was really important was changing some of the call numbers. So we had ABO as our suffix in a lot of our, well, not a lot of our books. So it was about 65 books. And we didn't want that as a suffix in a call number, so we changed that to ABOR as a standard. Something else that we've done is add cultural warning stickers to all of the print items that contain First Nations content. And we also added an authorship, sort of an authorship warning sticker to our dreaming titles, just to let people know that it might not have been written by a First Nations person. Mm-hmm. So the perspective and maybe the retelling might be a little bit off, but just to let them know about that. We also relocated a number of dreaming titles. They used to be in the folklore and myth sort of area of the collection, and we've moved that now to the religion section. And I think that was the result of somebody letting us know that that's more appropriate. That was a more appropriate location for them. So moving forward, so that's just some of the things that we've been doing to make sure that our libraries are safe spaces, both online and on campus. And moving forward, we're hoping to create our legacy collection with resources based on things like Marbo, the sciences, land management, frontier wars, and other really important topics that we want to find in our collection and bring together.
And enhance that metadata.
Yeah, enhance the metadata that's for those records.
Our learning journey began in the library in 2023 under the guidance of the head of library and the commitment of the school and library team to continue to enhance and embed culturally competent practice, contributing to national efforts and policies aimed at improving the respect and recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander knowledges, cultures and country. We are committed to ensuring First Nations peoples are represented accurately and equitably in resources available for study and research, as well as preserving First Nation peoples' languages, cultures and knowledge. The library team initiated the reparation process with a review of professional literature and webinars on reparation. Tui Raven's Guidelines for First Nations Collection Description for the Australian library sector continues to be an invaluable resource outlining key guidelines for First Nations collection description. An evaluation workflow chart used in conjunction with an evaluation form assists with the decision process on whether a resource will be archived or retained in the collection. A link to the evaluation form is added to the catalogue metadata, and the evaluation is saved to the library database. The Cabell ICAT decision tree is a useful tool in the evaluation process. Outdated resources with historical inaccuracies, misrepresentations, offensive, culturally insensitive language, or stereotypical depictions of Indigenous cultures and histories continue to be archived for professional learning purposes. Updating resource metadata following the recommended guidelines is ongoing. Enhanced records are sourced from Libraries Australia and SCIS. Training and support for catalogue practices, including guidances on First Nations resources, is available from subscribed cataloguing services. Library staff continue to identify and fill collection gaps and to extend and expand the representation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples within all areas of the collection. The acquisition criteria includes recently published age-appropriate works by Indigenous publishers, authors, artists and scholars to ensure authentic representation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, languages, achievements and communities. The Education Department reading lists, including resource guides to support the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander histories and cultural cross-curriculum priorities. To encourage interest and understanding of Indigenous cultures, the library has created comprehensive reading lists for students and staff. Physical and digital book displays celebrating the recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture, knowledge, communities and achievements are featured in the library spaces. The library website's OPAC's physical resources and catalogue metadata include a culturally sensitive advisory notice.
I think there are two really important things, and they're both to do with communication. So when you think about cataloging, you know, we've already moved so far away from data entry, but we need to start thinking about it in terms of the buzzwords that management are using in their corporate plans and strategic plans. And so, for example, if you're going into your business plan or whatever documents that you might have that already have corporate buy-in and buy-in from management, you should be looking for words like collaborative work, information access, improving community access, high quality data, online presence. Try and latch onto those kinds of broader terms and bring those directly into whatever projects you're working on, so that people can see a very clear connection between what you're doing and these sort of broader goals. And I think a lot of time people think cataloging is just, you're just tapping in some data, but you can really, really make a good case to sort of push the themes of communication, community, access, and use those avenues to get buy-in. And the second thing that I think is really helpful is to celebrate at least once a year, choose a week of importance to the communities that your library serves, choose 5 books and just fix up their records a little bit, you know, do some reparative work and just write a blog about it. So I do this most years for Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, or Māori Language Week. I'll find usually 10 Māori language books in our collection and just fix them up and write a short blog about them. It doesn't take much time, but it's a really good way of proving your value and the value of reparative description. I think it can seem abstract a lot of the time unless you can put that sort of thing forward. But yeah, maybe if you can't, either you can keep that one in, or I think for the second part of it, a really important second component of getting buy-in from management is keeping track of the reparative description work that you have done. And so I like to keep a spreadsheet of every single catalog record where I've made an intervention, and I'll just put in the identifier and I'll put in just a short note to myself on the type of work that I've done, so that I can show management when they come in, okay, well, in this record, you know, it was a book on women profiling 8 different women's lives and none of their names were mentioned in the record. And if you have these case studies that you can show them, it's much harder for them to argue with, because they can see that there was an inequity and that you've done something to create a more equitable access solution. So I would say any interventions you make, keep them in a spreadsheet, because you'll use it more than you think.
Our strategy to get buy-in from management for reparative description was to align the development of our library's First Nations collections and services with the organisation's priorities. So when we developed project documentation, we made sure it referenced organisational strategies and priorities. And we showed how library resources and services could aid delivery. And we also participated in intra and interdepartmental and professional working parties, workshops and training sessions. So we built partnerships with key stakeholders. We worked to enhance the cultural competency of our library staff and develop our own understanding of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's cultures and issues. And the emphasis here was always on the needs of our organisation and how the library's First Nations collections and services could support the organisation to achieve its goals.
So we were lucky at CSU, our First Nations Student Success team approached the library and asked if we were interested in looking at cultural safety in all of the library spaces. So we'd gone to them looking for some funding to make our learning commons more welcoming for First Nations students. And they said, well, what about the whole library? So they wanted us to look at our physical spaces, our online spaces, our learning objects, our services, and our collection, which I didn't realise at the time would be the main part of this project, I think. So we started working on the project about 2 years ago. And I spent 6 months talking to First Nations communities. Mostly I started with staff members and students and academics. Through those First Nations peoples, I got to talk to some community members. And at the same time, I just did a lot of reading and research on Australian and international protocols. I just printed out so much stuff. journal articles and looked at what was happening elsewhere and how other libraries were working with First Nations people, not only in Australia, but around the world, because there was a lot of great research out there from Canada, New Zealand, America. So management didn't have any issues then agreeing with the recommendations I made, because every recommendation I spoke to community about. They helped me with wording for our cultural warnings. They helped me with processes for looking at maybe secret and sacred books in the collection. And everything was also backed up by research. So I had the research and the community discussions and the agreements that we had. And it takes a long time, but we just talked about every idea that we came up with across different countries as well, because we cover Wiradjuri and Biripi countries with our different campuses. So lots of conversations helped management see that this is what our First Nations students needed and what they wanted in the spaces and in our description practices.
The library team continues to be supported by the school leadership team in the ongoing reparative description process. The school is actively participating in programs to support, connect and grow with our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students, staff, families and broader community. The involvement in the Waratah project and the Yallery Scholarship Program and provision for professional learning in this space, as well as school events dedicated to celebrating significant occasions together with our Indigenous families, is a testament to the school's commitment to the reparative process.
One small thing that everyone can do to start reparative description at work is to add in a contents field for the books that you're cataloguing. And that's very simple. It's going to be in the 505 field. And if you don't know what that is, you can ask someone who does. There's lots of documentation out there, but add in a contents field for the works, because what that does is, first of all, if it's a multi-contributor work, it's going to bring those names out in the record. And that's something that often isn't the case for community publications, and especially for communities that do produce work collaboratively as part of their methodology. Like, they get shafted. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Add in a contents field, a 505, and that's going to do two things. It's going to elevate the names of people who are part of a multi-contributor work, and it's also going to demonstrate a little bit to the person who's looking at the catalogue record what the approach of the book is. And so there's times where, for example, I've had an alternative history that comes across in every single other way as a neutral history of something. And it's only by looking at the contents and the way the argument is structured that you can see, okay, this is a conspiracy theory. And so you can see some of the major ideas around a work's development when you add in the contents. It's a little flag that you can give to researchers to say, hey, it may have this title, but this is a racist book, or this was written by an Indigenous person and has interviews with their family members in it. It can make a huge difference to the ability of users to select material that will both be safe and relevant for them. So next time you pick up a book and you want a quick dopamine surge, just pop in that 505 and add in the contents. And I can guarantee that even books that are published 2024, 2025, a lot of them do not have these fields. So that's something I'd recommend.
To start reparative description in your library, a great first step is to investigate your subject authorities. This will help you understand how First Nations collection items are currently described. Then you can start to reflect on the worldview that's being conveyed through those descriptions. And think about how we all have a role in how our world is classified and described. And this is really an opportunity to move beyond outdated cultural paradigms. And I'd also encourage library professionals to immerse themselves in learning, watching videos, attending conferences and workshops on reparative description and related topics like Indigenous cultural and intellectual property rights, Indigenous data sovereignty, Indigenous data government, governance and other related topics, and visit other libraries and archives that are engaged in this work, either in person or online, and then take the time to absorb the learnings, because this really is transformative work and it takes time.
So I've got lots of little things here that you could have a think about. But the most important, I think, is talking to your First Nations community, because you might have some fantastic ideas, but you need to be willing to let those go if that's not what the community wants. Listen and take on new ideas. Maybe it's something that you just really haven't ever thought about. But you also need to be able to explain the world of cataloguing to people. So think about, I had to learn how to talk about the importance of resource description and show in our Primo records what this looked like and what it could mean, and help people understand what subject headings were, explain why we use Library of Congress subject headings, and get those ideas out there, and then listen to ideas that the community had. But then I think joining a group, like things like the ALIA Reparative Description group, is probably a good place to join to get ideas. Looking at your state library and National Library's resources, because they've got some great information. And joining something like IFLA's Indigenous Matters section, you can get a lot of good resources from there as well. And those ATSLM protocols that are out there, have a really good read of those, because that's fantastic information. For any new acquisitions, I think it's an easy way to attack it is with new books that come in, check if you've got a language, if it's relevant, in the 041 field, in MARC, sorry, I'm talking fields. Look at the IATS's subject headings, and you can put a couple of those in and make the description more relevant. And we also put IATS's place names in, if we can, into the 651 field. So we try and use that when we're putting languages in. But you also need to make sure in your settings that in your discovery layer, so in Primo for us, we needed to do work to make sure those things were showing in our discovery layer, because they weren't. So our incredible cataloguers had to do some work to get all that work we were doing to even be seen. The other things that we did, as Nick said before, it's getting a cultural warning into places where people are going to see books. We also put a diversity, equity and inclusion statement into our online catalogue, just to explain to people that libraries do use standard language when describing materials, and we know it's a problem, and we put in a right of reply using our system so that people could report an issue if they saw something in our catalogue, to let us know that a book needs to be improved, the description of a book needs to be improved, or maybe a book shouldn't be on the shelf, maybe it's secret information that shouldn't be there. So one other good point, I think, was depending on what library management software you're using, get in touch with other libraries and see what they're doing in this space, because everyone is so helpful. We spoke to so many people from other libraries when we started this work, and everyone was just so giving. So yeah, see what other people are doing in the space, and then just use their ideas in your workplace if you can. Yeah.
Watch the 7 training videos by Tui Raven that accompany the guidelines for First Nations collection description, designed to support and inspire library staff as they implement the guidelines for the descriptive practice in your workplace.